You're listening to ViewSource, a conversation around tech, web development, and WordPress with hosts Aurooba Ahmed, that's me, and Brian Quartz.
Aruba, how are we doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I am excited to talk about accessibility today. How about you?
Me too. I feel like accessibility is one of those things that even though everyone talks about how important it is, we don't actually talk about the details of what we need to know and understand and do in order to actually make accessibility happen. So I'm really excited for this discussion today.
Yeah, and I've been working on some projects where we're taking older code and like making sure it's accessible and things that were built, even just a handful of years ago, you look at and you go like, "Oh,
Yeah,
this just wouldn't fly today." And that's a really good thing. It's such a difference from where I think the industry was like 5 years ago.
definitely. I think accessibility is far more accepted as this core piece of working and creating on the web. And the fact that it took us this long to get here is a little bit sad, but at least we are here now and it's gaining steam. And, we're taking a lot more seriously. And I'm really excited because it's one of those things that I'm still like working to learn as well. Like I wouldn't say that
Yeah.
I have a perfect handle on it.
Yeah, I would say there's like two things. One is like understanding why the choices are being made the way they're being made, and then the second part is like just the technical specs of making sure really your HTML most of all is like super accessible. So there's like the technical knowledge, but like first there's kind of just the understanding of like what are you trying to accomplish, what is the goal here, what sorts of things should you be thinking about as you're building out your code.
Yeah, and I feel like a part of learning about accessibility is almost like a re-education process around the purpose of different HTML elements because maybe in the way that the web and website making has evolved over time, sometimes we use the wrong elements and don't think about what those elements were actually meant for. And if we just use them for the things that they were supposed to be used for, we would already be making such strides towards accessibility, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's really good that this is going to be mostly a focus on HTML, but we're in the middle of a series on React. So like it's a good reminder that like your React really has to have good semantic HTML at its core because that's what your end user is really going to interact with. And so, unless that happens, unless that knowledge and education is there, it's all the JavaScript in the world won't save you from, especially with all of us who love using JavaScript to make super interactive, fun things online.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I'm really excited that in this process of looking at React inside WordPress and then, eventually growing into making an accordion block for the WordPress block editor, we are just, baking accessibility into it from the beginning and not taking it as sort of an afterthought. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to how we do that, Let's dive into that code.
Yeah, I wanted to take a step back first, though. And I just want to talk about when we're thinking about accessibility. What you're thinking about is how is a user interacting with a website, and there's really two sorts of key components when you're interacting with a website. There's like the visual component, which is I'm looking at your website, I'm navigating it
Yeah.
often visually. The second
Mhm.
piece is like a motor sensory thing where I'm using a mouse, I'm using a keyboard, I'm using like physical muscles to navigate through your website. And I think those are like
Right.
the two key areas where I think you have to think about, okay, what if I didn't have, vision, or I had some sort of visual impairment, whether it's like loss of vision or color blindness, how would that affect how I interact with this website? And if I
Yeah.
have some sort of motor issue where I can't use a mouse, I can't click, I can't hover, I'm maybe just have one thing I can do, which is tabbing through things and hitting enter, stuff like that. So I think like those two key areas, when you think about interacting through the keyboard, through the mouse, through the screen, and through like voiceovers, that kind of helps you think about what decisions you might make for accessibility.
Yeah, definitely. I think for those of us who are maybe a little more able-bodied or whatever the term is really, we mostly interact and with the websites and the digital web visually, but really we need to consider a lot more of the senses. because even though it's in front of us and we're using it visually, that's not always the case, right? Sometimes I forget about that too, but I just always remind myself, hey, sometimes I listen to things. Sometimes I even have a temporary disability where I'm like washing dishes and I can't use my hand, and it would be so nice to be able to do certain things, and for that to just be a natural, normal, available thing, you know?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so most of what we'll focus on is dealing with how would this work with a visual impairment where like a screen reader might be explaining, a user's journey through a page. And how
Hmm.
would this work if I couldn't use my mouse and I was maybe only able to tab through things or something like that. But
Yeah.
before we get there, do you want to give us a recap of like where we are in our React building journey?
Yeah. So, in the very first episode of this series, we looked at how to just get React onto the page inside WordPress, what that sort of looks like. And we created a button that says hello on it. And then when you click it, it shows the word world. And that was completely inaccessible, but it did have a button. So, there's that. And yes. Okay. So we're just sharing the screen here, and we can see the button that said hello. And if you click on it, then it says the word world. Yeah. But it's not
Yeah.
accessible. And then we sort of dove into, in the next part, we dove into the sort of meat and potatoes, as I had called it back then.
Once or twice.
Yeah, maybe just once or twice, of what sort of React it took to create this and what a React component is. But before we actually dive into creating a block, we are shifting gears, and we need to actually explore what the heck our accordion is, and make sure that we're looking at it as accessibly as possible.
So the big reveal is I did a lot of this accessibility work and I've updated our code base. So I'm going to switch branches right now and I'm going to reload the page. So this was what
Ooh,
our code looked like last time. I'm going to jump over to the next commit that has all of this information. I'm going to give it a quick reload and ooh.
ooh, it's looking different, and I
So
see. Okay, okay,
give
walk me
me,
through it.
okay. So
Yeah.
first thing is Hello World moved up into a big kind of header area. We're using more of a larger heading font, which we'll kind of get into
Mm-hmm.
semantically. There's a
Mm-hmm.
little like visual indicator that there is an accordion, and clicking on it will expand the
Right.
content. When I click on it, I get all of my
Ooh.
content showing.
Okay. There's a lot more there than we had before. I'm seeing
I
a bunch of good lorem ipsum here.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's lorem ipsum, and I got a little link in here. Do you want to give me your like guess or theory why I changed all the content of your block?
Well, first, now it actually looks like an accordion because it has real content in it. So that's really good. But I'm going to guess that it's really important to be able to navigate inside an accordion too. And this is going to help us demonstrate that and talk about it.
Yeah, so I wanted to put something inside of the content of the accordion that required like a user interaction and would be something
Right.
they could focus on, interact with. So that's why I have a paragraph, but I have some of the text converted into a link, and it's just going to help
Yeah.
us when we do kind of the walkthrough of all of this. But otherwise, pretty standard FAQ page accordion right here, don't you think?
Yes. But I know we were talking about this before. This is not actually an accordion, right?
Yeah, break this down. I have like a list of semantic things that I want to get to here. So
Yeah.
this is not an accordion. Explain to me. You explain what is this?
So when we were learning Bootstrap, and this was the first time I had come across this terminology, and I guess I just never thought about it before, or I called it something different. But in Bootstrap, they call this piece here, when it's just one heading with opening content, a collapse, or a
Yeah,
collapsible section. That's all it
yeah,
is. And then when I was researching this for this episode, in the accessibility standards, they specifically say that an accordion is a vertically stacked sections that all, like multiple sections that sort of are set up together. That's what an accordion is. So, is that how you always think about it?
yeah. And it's like I'll be honest, I never thought about that distinction. Like it's kind of a
Yeah.
semantic distinction, but like it does make a lot of sense. I think what's going to happen is as we get further along, we will need to be stacking these elements and we will want to
Yeah.
do some of the things that an accordion does where like you click one and it closes the other ones and opens this one. And,
Right.
I sort of
There's a
understand that.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. There's like a broader state that's going to have to be managed and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Totally. Okay.
There's also like the sections inside of it. So like we have up here what they would call like the header of it, and in here is
Yeah.
like the body or the panel of it.
See, I always call this one whole thing a panel, but I guess it makes sense that it wouldn't be the whole thing as a panel, but instead there is a like it's a section that has a panel, because that's the part that's sliding in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this is the panel, this is the heading. The one that I keep getting tricked up on, and this is like I'm never going to solve this problem, but it's like a heading versus a header. Can
Yeah.
you explain like the difference between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think of a header of a website, a header has multiple components in it, but like it'll have the site logo, it'll have a navigation, it might have like a search area, but a heading is one atomic piece that typically doesn't have anything except for one thing in it. So like the header, like the header of a blog post, in that the heading would be the title, even though the header itself might have the title, the featured image, and the date, right?
Yeah, and I think like, you think of like the header of your website and then this is like
Yeah.
the header of a blog post, right? But this is the
Yeah.
heading element, which is typically an H1, H2, and so forth. So it's it's one of those things where whenever I'm typing that, whatever one I think I'm talking about, I say the wrong one, and it's like I always have to stop and go heading, header, or when I'm like naming variables or anything like that, or like naming table
Yeah.
parts. It's always I just don't think I'm ever going to internalize that one. I think it's just lost.
But like when we get into the code of this, then I have a question because even though this top part, right, we're saying this is a header, right? The hello world and the little icon triangle, it's a header,
Yeah,
but is it a header based on what we just talked about, you know? When we go into the code, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Before we go into the code, I think there's one more thing, which is I think we should demo like the keyboard navigation of this element, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I close the accordion. We're looking at like just the whole page. I'm going to tab focus through it so you can see like here's where the focus is right now. So if I were to hit enter or return to my keyboard, I would like go to that link. Um,
Yes, the site
I
logo.
tab exactly, and then I tab over to my navigation menu, and I have a rant somewhere about the navigation block in Gutenberg that I had to use to build this. So if you could find that and splice that in here, I think everyone needs to hear my struggles getting that navigation block working for this demo site. Now I will
And
tab
then
focus to the accordion itself, which is the next focusable element on the page. And
and it
we have a
actually
nice,
doesn't focus on the big outline you have around it. It actually focuses inside on what I'm guessing is the header, right?
well,
Just the
it's
header.
focusing on the button. So there's an actual
Right.
button element that's focusable. And we'll kind of go into that because it's important to know like what's focusable, what is, what's the best semantic way. So this is actually a button
Yeah.
is what's being
Okay.
focused right now. And if
Got
I
it.
hit, you should be able to hit return to basically open or close the element. And then at that point, I can actually tab into my content and I can focus on the next thing, which
Mm,
is the link here.
right. And that's really important because, yeah, FAQs are often one that will just often just have links, but sometimes accordions or accordion sections have more than just like regular content in it. Sometimes they have forms in it. Sometimes they have like call to actions in there or videos. All kinds of things can end up in there, right? So it's really important that people can interact with that too.
Yeah, and like if you look at we'll definitely link in the show notes to some like documentation about accessibility and the demo that they use. It's literally like a form. So each panel is a
Mm,
set of form fields and stuff. So it is really important
right.
to make sure you can do that. On the other hand, I'll go back and focus. I'm going to close the accordion. Once the accordion's closed, I don't want to be able to focus on anything inside of it. I should be able to just go past it and move further down the
Right.
page and skip over that content.
Okay. And there's probably something that you've included in the element in the code to be able to do that, right? To make sure it's not. focusing on the stuff inside it. I mean, it's React, so it probably doesn't exist. But even if it does
Yeah.
exist, you shouldn't be focusing on it, right?
So that's a good question. It is because it's React, it's like not in the DOM at all. But
Yeah,
normally, if you're using like a display none, I think you're fine.
that's true. That's true. You're right. That also basically acts like it's not in the DOM.
Yeah. And then there's a few things that we won't demo here, but like there, when we get into the code, we'll see that there's some ARIA tags that are here and they're on the button and they're basically letting the user know, is it expanded or not? Because the user doesn't know when they're on the button if it's expanded or if it's not. So there is like what's
Hmm.
called an ARIA tag that would let like a voiceover tool know that, if you click this, it'll expand it, or it's expanded, click it to close it.
Yes. And I memorized it for the episode. ARIA stands for accessible rich accessible rich internet applications. That's it, right?
Accessible, rich internet applications.
Yes. Okay.
Very good. That's very
Just
good.
in case. Just in case
And that's
someone was wondering, because I've always wondered and never thought to look it up before.
let's go to the code
Yes.
and look at this stuff. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I have the code editor open. We're looking at our app.js file, and we're just going to kind of go line by line through this. You ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm already seeing a bunch of interesting things here.
Okay. So most of the top of this file did not change. So we're importing state from WordPress's element package. We're setting up our state of whether the accordion is open or closed. We have a little function to handle toggling all of that. All of that's kind of the same. And so you can watch the previous episode to get a sense of how that state works and what those functions do.
Yeah, we'll link it in the cards up in the corner for you.
The next thing is this right here. So the big change is our accordion is made up of two pieces, this header area up here, and then the
Hmm.
actual content down here. So let's start with the heading/header and break it down.
So this is what I meant because H2 is a heading. It's not a header, but we're treating it as a header, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that kind of weird?
So so it's doing both. Yeah. Yeah, I don't that's pretty weird. I was
Yeah.
gonna make a joke, but I won't about how weird I think that is or not gonna be. Um Yeah, it's so this was actually a big one that we kind of had to dig into because I've seen like I recently just saw some accordions where there was no button, right? There was just an H2, and then there was like a lot of this stuff was on the H2.
A
The
lot
thing
of the
is,
ARIA tags and stuff.
yeah, like all of the extra information, the click
Right.
event was bound to the H2 and that sort of thing. So you
Right.
know the problem with that is an H2 is not like by default a like focusable element. So if you add click events to an H2 but you don't specifically put in like a role equals button to like let
Hmm.
the browser know that this is a clickable element. If you don't do that extra piece, you kind of lose a lot of stuff in it. It actually just isn't accessible.
Right. And you're just like making it harder for yourself instead of taking advantage of everything that's already baked into the
A
browser
button.
for certain elements. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So one extra element, but it's definitely worth the trade-off.
Right.
That said, what I did not know is that when I styled this, or when I put the button inside the H2, it actually did not take any of the font size. Like the browser defaults actually like kind of messed with that, and they really wanted it to be a button. And even when I did like appearance none on the button, so
Hmm.
you can, I'll switch over to my CSS, but like I had to put in all these like inherits on everything to like,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
Because I
So
mean, I can see why it would have like that button look, but you would think that if it says appearance none, then it would just. So what happened? It was just like a regular tiny piece of text
yeah,
and not.
pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
It
Interesting.
because the browser was inject like the browser style sheet had like font some font and other stuff like on
Right.
it that was separate, so you kind of had to
Right.
like do that. So I would say just caveat, like test this in multiple browsers to make sure your styling is right, because it did not take the styling immediately.
Noted. Okay.
Let's go through these elements real quick. I give the button an
Yeah.
ID. That'll be important later.
Hmm.
We have a click event on the button. That's React. That we went over that before. Nothing changed there. this is the change right here. ARIA expanded. This is where you're telling any sort of screen reader whether or not the content is expanded. And I was actually unsure. In my mind, I was kind of thinking it went on the actual element, like letting you know if the element is expanded, but it's on the button
Mm,
because the person is on the button and the button needs to know if the content is expanded. So
right.
um, we just bound it to the React variable called isOpen.
Which is really nice. And just the
Mm-hmm.
same one variable that we can just take care of everything with.
Mm-hmm. I might rename the variable. I forgot to tell you.
No, I think it makes sense. We should make it is expanded.
Is expanded. Yeah, let's keep
Yeah,
it all the same.
totally.
And then finally, ARIA controls, where we're just letting the browser know which element we're talking about. Which element are we controlling the visibility of?
Right. It's sort of like the remote control, you know? That's the thing that you're going to use to control whether you can see or use the content and what it's linked to. I think it's a really well named ARIA tag.
I will say the one thing though is, we're using React to like show and hide this. And if we were not, like if the content was always in the DOM, like this right here is not going to actually do the work of showing and hiding the content. So that's
Right.
something to keep in mind. Like this is about like sending information, but this has nothing to do with the actual interactivity. Like you have to build that.
Right, right. It's static information. It's not information that yeah, you need JavaScript of some kind or some sort of fancy CSS toggle owl selectors, not stuff going
Owl
on to make it
selectors.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like those like janky, like I'm a checkbox, but you click me and it like does all these other things.
I've definitely done that, okay? It
Yeah.
works really nicely when you don't wanna use some
Yeah.
JavaScript, but you're right, it is a little janky.
It's not my favorite. It's like checkbox trickery. I don't know why it feels shisty to me. All right. That's it. Anything? Well, you will also notice that my little caret guy is just a pretty basic pseudo element. You
Right.
know,
But you could have
nothing
also just
fancy.
put it in there if you wanted, inside the button, right?
Like put the icon in there as an actual
Yeah,
icon.
yeah.
Yeah, I could have. There's no reason not to. I was, for a minute there, I thought, well, if I put an icon, I guess I need to put a screen reader text for the icon and everything. But
Mm,
at the end of the day, it's purely decorative and it's not in
right,
any way functional or content.
right.
So
Yeah, it's really just a visual indicator, it's not an indicator in any other way because the ARIA tags are controlling all the other indicators, right?
exactly. So it felt like it would just like
Clutter it
add
all up.
noise. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get
yeah,
that. So that's a good tip because, we always have some sort of like plus or minus or a triangle or something like that going on in there. So I like the idea that you would just do it in a pseudo, keep it nice and clean inside the HTML.
yeah. And I just like display flex the button so like it actually puts it nicely. I didn't have to absolute position. I didn't have to do anything like that.
Hmm.
When it's clicked, we have a little transform rotation on it, and this guy right here, which is actually one of my favorite things.
Yes. I love that you can target ARIA tags inside your CSS. So if you just handle that, then you don't even have to have extra classes or anything, right?
Yeah, and like I was actually thinking about this for an unrelated piece of code recently today that I was reviewing, and it had it was like toggling classes on things like it's open, closed, all that sort of stuff. And you probably know what I'm thinking of, and I'm thinking about it, and I didn't think about it till right now in this moment. I thought like, oh, we could actually do this. Like this would
Yeah.
actually be a much better way to do it.
And it needs to have accessibility baked into it anyway, so it's perfect. I
Yeah,
I
so
I get
like
it. Yeah.
less code for sure.
Yes. Less jankiness, less just less and more of just like using what is available to us semantically in the browser, which I love because the less code we can write, the cleaner we can keep it, the better.
Yeah, and like I said, I've been reviewing some of my old code, and so this has been very helpful for me to 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 see where I go. Oh wow, I overdeveloped it. It's like that thing where it's like a good developer like has less code and not more. Like,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
all
Okay,
right,
so that is our accordion section header,
mm-hmm.
right? So now we're going
Yes,
into the what is called the panel.
yes. So we have it's inside of this JavaScript function here where we're basically just checking the value of is open. So this all kind of stays the same. The difference
Hmm.
here is I wrapped it in a nice div so that I could, for one, give the whole container an ID and like link those two things together.
Right.
Do you think, is there something wrong? Do you see an error?
I mean, is there an error? Wait, is there an error? No, I
Tell me
don't
if
think
you
so.
think there's an error.
Hold on, hold on. ARIA control, it controls the panel, and it's labeled by the button. I don't know. Tell me, what's the error?
This guy right here does not belong. So
Oh,
I'm passing IDs in ARIA controls and ARIA labeled by, you're passing the ID of an element,
yeah,
of which element you're talking about. And notice up here, I don't actually have like the like
the
hash
hashtag.
selector, like the CSS selector. And in
Ah,
here I do, and it's not supposed to be there at all.
right, so it always has to be an ID, so you don't actually need the hashtag there. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes
And I think that
sense.
would actually break it because it would be the wrong ID.
But it didn't break it. You showed the front end and it was working. Oh, but it
Well,
might
but
break it like for a voiceover or
for the
for like the
voiceover,
actual
yeah.
assistive device.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. I don't think I ever actually paid attention to the fact that you can't have the hashtag in there or that you can only use IDs, even though I know that you can only use IDs in there.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would say you can't. Maybe you can't. I didn't look into it, but I'm pretty sure that it would break it.
Yeah, I think so
Um,
too. You're right.
and then everything else here is like, pretty standard, and we can put in a bunch of stuff, and this is gonna toggle
Right.
it pretty well.
Mostly because you put a little transition on it in your styles, right?
No, I didn't get that
No?
far.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
I think that opens a conversation because in my mind, like the real use case for this would be a page that's loaded where the content is all loaded, right? Like the
Right.
idea that we're building this in React, yes, but at the end of the day, the front end of a most like WordPress websites are not going to
Yeah.
be injecting content in React. So I think there would be
Yeah.
a different thing about transition and the animations and stuff that I would do a lot differently if I were animating it in with React or if I were showing content that was already on the DOM.
Okay. So, but why would it have to be different? I mean, you could still have the transitions on it, even if it's being injected into the DOM, because then as soon as you add it, then that transition would play, right? Of like
Yeah.
sliding it out really nicely or whatever.
Yeah. You don't think, I guess in my mind, I was like, I'm going to need a React library that handles it. But it's like, no, I can just do some CSS, like the
Yeah,
same
you could just do
CSS
some
animations.
CSS. Yeah, you
Yeah.
just like
Okay.
translate it, right? Like use the transform and translate it down or something like that, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't get
I
that
like that.
fancy.
Well, I mean that wasn't the point, but this is really cool. So this is an accessible accordion section. But in React or even in like not React, if you had multiple of them, you would have to have some way of identifying the different unique IDs, right? Which we don't have right now because they're hard coded in.
Yes. So I think that's like a good place to say what we'll do next, which is I think the next thing we need to do is plan for multiple accordions. And I think what that really means is a lot of like this stuff needs to be broken down into separate components.
Yeah,
And we need to be able to like have dynamically different IDs so that we're not, we can't just hard code IDs because we're going to have multiple ones on the page, potentially a more like higher state that can kind of track all of them at
manage
once.
those. Hmm. Yeah,
What do you think?
I think yeah, I think that makes sense, and I'm excited because we'll be pulling in some stuff we already learned about React components, but then also adding a little bit more React knowledge in it, and also talking about how it all works when there's an actual accordion and not just a single accordion section.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we, uh, episode 3 on this series, we hit accessibility. Next time we will, I think we got to be better and and not
Yes.
even give a demo if we're not going to put in that accessibility. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. Next time it needs to be episode 1.
Episode 0.
0.
Yeah.
0 indeed. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll see you on that next episode. Break out some components.
All right, yeah. See you then.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Visit viewsource.fm for the latest updates and links to the show notes. Review and subscribe to ViewSource in iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.